Okay, welcome everybody. Our topic today is going to be who is the ger and Chumash, the stranger. And I want to start with a pasuk. I'm going to share my screen real fast. I'm going to show you a pasuk that happened to be in this week's parsha in Chutz La'aretz, at least when you did Shlach. Everyone see this line? V'nislach l'chol adat b'nei Yisrael v'leger hagar b'tocham ki locham bishgaga. Everyone see it?
Yes.
Okay. How come that looks familiar to everybody?
Yom Kippur.
Yeah, when do we say it in Yom Kippur? On a full stomach, right? And Kol Nidre. Right when Yom Kippur starts. Now, everyone knows that pasuk by heart. Did anyone ever pay attention that pasuk talks about a ger, a stranger? Anyone ever pay attention to that? But here's my big question. Is that stranger, is he a convert? Is he Jewish or not Jewish? Remember, you know the pasuk by heart, you say it every Yom Kippur. I'm sure I've never found anyone who ever even pondered the question on Yom Kippur. It's part of our prayer. We're asking God to forgive the Jewish people and the ger. Are we asking forgiveness for converts who gerim? Is that a convert or a Jew? I mean, or any stranger in our midst. Okay, I don't need the answer, but do you understand the question? Now, the word ger, if you have the source sheet, I'll share my regular source sheet now. The word ger comes up in Chumash about 70 times. There's a little map there. You can see the shared screen. Let me share my screen real fast. Put you guys on the side. Just put the screen there. Okay. If you look at the source sheet, you'll see it's 2 times in Sefer Bereshit, 12 times in Shmot, Vayikra. Basically, it comes up a lot in Chumash. And not just a lot, it comes up in very key places in Chumash, as we'll see. And my question I want to discuss is who is the ger in Chumash? Is he a convert or is he a Gentile? Okay? He's definitely a stranger, but the question is it always the same or can it change? Now, if you're familiar with academia, I'm pretty sure almost all academic sources claim that the idea of conversion didn't begin until the Second Temple period. You can check out with your university professors or scholarly books, but from the info I got, their overall approach is that conversion as we know it only begins in the Second Temple period, and during the time of Tanakh, there was no such thing as conversion. Just like Yisrael can't become a Kohen, a non-Jew can't become Jewish. It's very, not just ethnic, but genetic. Now, in rabbinic literature, the rabbis are distinguished between a ger tzedek and a ger toshav. Got it? A ger tzedek is a convert, and a ger toshav is someone who's not converted, someone living among us. Now, Chumash never uses these phrases. You understand? In rabbinic jargon, a ger tzedek is a convert, a ger toshav is a non-convert. He's not Jewish, but he's living among us. The stranger is living in our midst. But again, the rabbis use that terminology when they discuss strangers, when it says gerim. But in Chumash doesn't use those. Sometimes one might say ger toshav, but it doesn't use that consistently. It never uses the word ger tzedek. Now, in modern day jargon, when you say someone's a ger, usually means he's a convert, correct? But that's our jargon today. That's definitely not biblical or rabbinic. Now, I want to begin with the first time the stranger is mentioned. And in case you didn't look at the source sheet, the first time we have the word stranger, ger, is in the first covenant between God and Avram Avinu, and the first conversation between God and Avram Avinu, called Brit Ben Abtarim. Now, I'm assuming if God only has 2 conversations with Avram Avinu, and he's the only one of our forefathers that God has a conversation with, so it's got to be something important. It's the first covenant in Chumash, and if ger is a central theme in the first covenant in Chumash, it's got to be a mega theme in the Bible. That's my first point. So where do we have stranger in Chumash? When God makes a covenant, remember God told Abraham he's going to become a great nation. And Abraham wants to know how long is it going to take? You know, God promises if you have lots of children like the stars in the sky. But Abraham asked the question, how or when is this going to happen, God tells Avraham Avinu, what does he need to know? The offspring I promised you that will be like stars in the sky, they'll be strangers in someone else's land. They're going to be enslaved and oppressed, and it'll be some period of 400 years. I'll punish the oppressor, and then I'll take them out. And then that day, later on, God convenes the covenant with Avraham Avinu, called Brit Ben Abtarim, which is the story of Passover, the story of the Exodus. It's not just a Brit, it's like one of the biggest things in Chumash and in davening, in our holiday season, the idea of remembering God taking us out of Egypt. And for some reason, God wanted to become a people. God wants a nation. That's the biggest theme in Sefer Bereshit, or in Chumash. God wants a nation to serve him forever. To become that nation, it was necessary to go through suffering and being a stranger in someone else's land, being oppressed and learning from that experience. And all through Chumash later, we have to remember we were strangers in Egypt. That'd be a big thing. Now, the second time we have it in Bereshit is going to be when Avram wants to buy a burial place. Remember in Hebron? And he says, Ger v'toshavanu mechem. If we have time, we'll go back to that later on. Now, throughout Chumash, sometimes it says Ger, plain stranger. Sometimes Ger comes with a more specific definition. Sometimes it'll be like V'havtem et hager. We'll see this pasuk in a minute. But sometimes you'll have Ger sheberetzecha. Sometimes it'll be Ger shebekirbecha. Sometimes it'll be Ger shebetochechem. It comes in probably 10 different ways we have the word Ger, but sometimes plain Ger. Just for the fun of it, open up. I asked some people with different chumashim. Okay, open up Devarim chapter 10, verse 19, and let's see how they translate the famous line in Devarim chapter 10, verse 19. It's in Parshat Ekev. See, and I'll read the Hebrew here. V'havtem et hager, you shall love the stranger because you were strangers in Egypt. Let's see how they translate that into English. Okay, this pasuk, is it referring to converts or any stranger in your midst? Okay, who has it? Ilana, you had one there. Yeah, what's yours, Dave? You have what?
I have Art Scroll. It says proselyte.
No, read the whole sentence in English.
Okay, you shall love the proselyte, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt.
What's wrong with that translation? You shall love the proselytes. It means ger, that means a convert, right?
Well, it uses the same word, but it defines it differently in English.
You see the problem? Now, our scroll always follows Chazal. And Chazal say V'havtem et hager is only a mitzvah only for converts. You can argue what's pshat or not, but do you see the problem in the translation? How do you take the same word in the same verse and translate it differently? And there's no logic saying you have to love this because we weren't converts in Egypt. We were strangers in Egypt. Okay, so keep that in mind. Stacy, what did you have? You had JPS?
Yeah. So mine says you too must befriend a stranger, for you were strangers.
Okay,
land.
so they're more consistent. Okay. Does anyone in the Beit Midrash have a different English translation?
Yeah.
What was Magerman? Yeah, I wanted Magerman.
I have Robert Alter. It says sojourners.
Oh yeah, what's Robert Alter say?
It says, so you are to love the sojourner, for sojourners were you in the land of Egypt.
Okay, it says sojourner for both, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, he'll have to be consistent. And what did Rabbi Sachs do in Magerman?
You too must love the strangers. For you
Because?
yourself strangers
In Egypt. Okay, so there, other than our school, everyone else is least consistent in the translation. Okay, but keep those open. Keep those different sources open. We'll get back to them soon. Now, a quick question for you: does the stranger have to fast on Yom Kippur? What would you say? I mean, if he's a convert, for sure he does, right? How about someone who's not a convert? Do they have to fast on Yom Kippur?
No.
Why not?
Because they're there temporarily, maybe.
I mean, do they have Yom Kippur? Now, if you know I'm going to stop this share. I'm going to open up my Chumash real fast. If you have a Chumash, open up in Sefer Vayikra, chapter 19. Chapter 16 in Sefer Vayikra. Vayikra, chapter 16. Open up verse 29 and see what all the English translations say about this. Any Balkori knows this pasuk by heart. And I have to open up in my Chumash, I'm sorry. My mistake. It's supposed to be open here. Wrong Chumash Bible. We need Vayikra, chapter 16, verse 29. Okay. Chapter 16, verse 29. Okay, let's see what we got. I have the English Hebrew JPS here. Let's see what it says. This is the Avodah Yom Kippur. Vaytar lechem l'chukat olam b'chodesh shviv b'asor l'chodesh nafshotechem. B'chol melacha lo tasu ha'ezrach v'ager gar b'tochechem. Are you surprised? Who has to fast in Yom Kippur? Every citizen and the ger who's living among you. That phrase? Now, is he Jewish or not? Okay, you can guess what our scroll will say. Ilana?
Yeah, so it says the proselyte who dwells among you.
Among you. Okay, that makes sense. Okay. What does JPS say? Stacy?
It says, wait a minute. I just scrolled.
1629.
This the alien.
The alien, okay.
Yeah.
So the sojourner the stranger became an alien. Okay. And what does Robert Alter say?
He says the sojourner who sojourns in your midst.
Oh, so he uses sojourner all the time. Okay. And Magerman? Migrant. Awesome. Okay. Isn't that amazing how everyone translates it differently? But is a migrant Jewish or not? Now, what's the problem? If he's Jewish, of course if he's a convert, of course he has to keep Yom Kippur. If he's not Jewish, why should he keep Yom Kippur? Right? Everyone follows the problem? So I'm going to bring one more example. I'll go back to our main source sheet now. And we're going to go back to, I want to bring a proof that sometimes a ger for sure is not Jewish. Okay, got it? What's it say? In Dvarim, as long as you have Dvarim open, chapter 14, verse 21, laws of kashrut, okay? It says, Lo tuchlu cho nevela, you can't eat a nevela. La ger asher bisharecha titinena va'achla o mechor lo nochri. Yam kadosh ata l'Hashem elokecha lo tfashal gid b'ched v'imo. Everyone knows that pasuk. So what's it say? We can't eat a nevela. Right? Who do you give the nevela to? You either gift it to a stranger or you sell it to a nochri. Now, he can't be, where's our art scroll? That can't be a proselyte now, right? Look, check the 1421. Okay. Stacy, yours probably still says a stranger, right? Check all the different translations. Right. This one, everyone agrees can't be Jewish. By definition, Kiyam Kadosha, you can't eat it, but he can. I'm proving sometimes the ger is not a proselyte. Yeah. What's it say? Do you have it, Ilana?
Yes, it's a stranger.
Okay, stranger. That makes sense. I'm sure Stacy will say the same thing in JPS, right? Okay. How did Robert Alter kept with sojourner?
Migrant.
Oh, now he's a migrant. That's interesting. Okay.
Here it says, give it to the migrants in your town.
That's in Magerman or in Alter? Magerman says migrant. Okay. It's interesting that the word migrant, Rabbi Sachs used the word migrant a lot in his translation. And what did Robert Alter say?
Sojourner. Still sojourner.
A sojourner. Okay. So Alter is consistent. He's always a sojourner, but he's not differentiating between a Jew and a non-Jew, a convert and non-convert.
So because this one is stranger in your community.
Which is that one?
Stranger in your community.
A stranger. Okay. It makes sense. This one can't be Jewish, but notice a lot of the translations use the same word for when the Yom Kippur guy and the one you give the nevela to. Now, later on in Vayikra, what's it say? If you eat nevela, you become tameh. Okay? I'm sorry. Here. If you're Jewish, right? I'm sorry. I can skip that one. Here, we'll talk about, there's a law about eating dam here. In chapter 17, you can open up Vayikra 17 in your different English translations. Vayikra 17, there's lots of laws there. that talk about a ger. It says there, "Alkein amati v'nei Yisrael kol nefesh mikem lo tochal dam, v'ager b'tochem lo tochal dam." Now, is a non-Jew allowed to eat blood? He can't eat every minachai, but he's allowed to eat blood. So this one seems to be he's Jewish. And how about covering when you shech the chayav of a wild animal, you have to cover the blood. Kisui adam dish vish mibnei so min hager agar b'tocham asher yitzu tzayit chayav of. Okay, v'shavak damo v'chiso ba'afar. And then b'chol nefesh asher tochan avela trefa bezrach v'ager v'chibes b'ger v'chas b'mayim. If you eat an avela or trefa by accident, you become tameh. That's for sure talking about a Jew. There's no tuba by non-Jews. So it's interesting that an avela, sometimes a ger, an avela, you can feed it to a ger, but this ger, if he eats it, becomes tameh. But just like a Jew, but Ezrach here is Jewish. Always I want to show you that it's confusing, right? Agree? You agree with me? It's confusing. I'll try to clear it up. The first another 2 minutes of confusion, I'll try to make sense out of it. But I have to confuse you to appreciate what we're going to do. Now, let's get back to something halacha l'maaseh. Does a ger who's not a convert, can he have chametz or not? A ger toshav, is he allowed to have chametz? Can you sell your chametz to a ger toshav? Well, let's see what chametz says. Okay, you say. Chapter 12, verse 19. Shivat yamim sor lo mesebe batechem in Parshat HaChodesh. Remember, chapter 12 and 10. Ki cholcha machmetzet v'nichreta nefshahi mi'adat Yisrael ubager bezrach haaretz. Right? You can't have any sor, you can't have any leaven in your house. Anyone who eats leaven from the nation of Israel and the ger and the ezrach in their midst is chayiv karet. We'll see. Is he Jewish or not? Well, what's his, by Ilana, right? Our scrolls say convert, right? I mean, proselyte or convert? Proselyte.
Actually, it says convert here.
Convert, okay. I'm not sure when it says convert, when it says proselyte, but they're both the same. JPS, Stacy? Look it up and tell me, give me Alter and Magerman here. I'm sure Alter still says sojourner, right? I'm assuming he's consistent. And what did Magerman do? It's Shmot 12:19. Migrant, okay. So I guess he holds migrant. You have to check how consistent he is on migrant there, whether he's differentiating between Jewish and not Jewish. But isn't that interesting? Now, what's the problem? If he's Jewish, listen to the problem. If he's Jewish, of course he can't have chametz. If he's not Jewish, why can't he have a chametz? You see the problem? If he's a convert, he should be like everyone else. Why mention him? He's converted. He's Jewish. If he's not a convert, why would he be chayv in Yom Kippur? Why would he be chayv in chametz? Yeah, Elana, question?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not getting the full structure, but I'm wondering if these are people in the process of conversion who are living in your midst, and for consistency, you need them sometimes to go through the motions of the rest of the congregation, even though they're not chayav yet.
Okay.
And
So
sometimes
Ebenezer
like,
goes,
Levi,
Ebenezer
it's
sort of
okay.
goes, yeah.
Okay.
Ebenezer has, listen, a lot of the classic Parshim deal with the problem. What's the core of the problem? The core of the problem is, if he's a convert, why mention him? Say once a convert is chayav in everything. Okay? If he's not a convert, why is he obligated? What's his punishment? Okay? He's cut off mi'adat Yisrael. Okay? And later we'll see he's cut off from his people. How can you be chayiv karet if you're not Jewish? How do you have a concept of karet if you're not Jewish? Because karet is always something covenantal. Every time you have karet, it's covenantal related. Brit Milah, Pesach, all the Mikdash things. Whenever you have karet, it's always something relating to a covenant. So what's going on? What's this idea? Again, you see the problem? Now, Ebenezer's direction is going to be, he says, people who are full-time residents living in our country, even though they're not Jewish, they got to play by the rules. They can't bring chametz into the hospital on Pesach if you know modern day Israeli politics. You follow the problem? Everyone's stuck here because on the one hand, how can he be chayv karet? But if he's Jewish, why mention him? If he's not Jewish, so there's this group of people who are living among us. Let's say you have a grandparent or a parent who needs help, right? Needs siud. Siud is siud is in English. Siud, nursing, old age home stuff. So you bring someone from Sri Lanka, from the Philippines, and they're living here for 5 years, for 10 years, 15 years, and they're part of our society. They're not Jewish. So did they follow our rules or not? Is that the ger we're talking about? Again, it's very unclear. Now, on top of it, if there is a convert, where does Chumash talk about conversion? Okay, so now I'm going to take a break, share my screen, and I'll tell you my idea. When you go through the 70 times, because we only have an hour, we have less than a half hour left. We have a half hour left. When you go through all the places in Chumash, you find a ger, listen carefully, you have to differentiate between two types of situations where we mention the ger. Listen carefully. There's situations where we're obligated to take care of a stranger, which is 80% of the time. Like for v'ahavtem et hager, loving the stranger. V'ger lo teneh, don't mistreat a stranger. We'll see examples of it in a minute. But most of the times, it's our obligation to a stranger. About 10, 15 times in Chumash, it's the obligation of the stranger. Yom Kippur is the obligation of the stranger. Chametz, the obligation of the stranger. Dam. Understand? We'll see. How about Paraduma? I should ask you that in the beginning. This week's parsha in Israel. Paraduma. Does a ger need Paraduma? What would you think? Would a ger need Paraduma?
That's
If he's a convert, of course. If he's not a convert, why would he? So as long as we have Leviticus open, should be in Leviticus, but it's in Bamidbar. My mistake. Bamidbar, where are we? Where is that? Chapter 19, right? Look in verse 10 and 11. Vasaf ish tahor, I'm sorry, here it is. V'chibes Yosef et Efra para, verse 10. Et Efra para, v'tamei ha'arev, v'ayta livnei Yisrael v'lager gar b'tocham l'chukat olam. The Efer of the para means spring for Tumat Met applies to who? To a ger gar b'tocham. How can he not be Jewish? But if he's Jewish, why mention him separately? You see the problem? So this is an example of the obligation of the ger. The ger needs paraduma, he needs efer para. So again, I want to make a distinction between the obligation of the stranger and our obligation to a stranger. Now, when you go through all the obligations of the stranger, one of the most amazing things is again, we mention his obligation. Not every law in Chumash mentions the ger, but about 10 different laws mention the ger that he's obligated. And every time there's an obligation with a prohibition, it's always a punishment of karet. I'm going to repeat that to make sure it's clear. Remember Yom Kippur? Yom Kippur is karet, right? Chametz on Pesach, karet. Achilat dam, karet. Paraduma, if you go to the mikdash and you're tameh, you're chayiv karet. Okay? You check every single time there's obligation of the stranger. Right? It's in the context of a prohibition whose punishment is karet, and not just karet mi'amo or mi'adat Yisrael. You follow? Now, if that's true, then of course he's Jewish. You follow? I can't understand how you can have karet if you're not Jewish. It just doesn't make any sense. You could have a chiyuv of karet if someone who's not Jewish. Karet mi'amo. If he's not Jewish, why would he be obligated? Especially something like Chametz on Pesach. Yom Kippur is God's brit with Am Yisrael and his midot of rachamim. So then the question comes up: if he's Jewish, why mention him over and over again? Just say it once. So what I want to claim is as follows: whenever there's the obligation of the stranger, whenever the stranger is obligated, the case we saw Chametz on Pesach again. What else was there? Dam, achilat dam, eating blood. Shchut techutz, we didn't see. A korban outside the mikdash. What else was there? We saw paraduma, we saw Yom Kippur. All those different cases. Also, remember the pasuk we had at the beginning, Misach l'chaladat. That's not just from Yom Kippur davening. That's the case if the Supreme Court makes a mistake. I'm not Supreme Court. We're going to read it. You read it last week. It's called Par. We read it in Shlach. That's part Par Halem Davar Shetzibor. When the Beit Din, when the Sanhedrin makes a mistake. So let's say they said something was kosher and it wasn't. People wait for whatever they did wrong. Therefore, the entire nation needs forgiveness. But it's got to remember, if it's Par Halam Davar Shetzibor, then it's got to be for people who are Jewish. Now let's go back to our distinction. So here's my point. Whenever we find an obligation of the stranger, for some reason, it's always in the context of a obligation whose punishment is karet. And more than that, flip it around. Almost every time there's a prohibition in Chumash whose punishment is karet, Chumash mentions the stranger. I'm flipping it around. Are you paying attention? I'll say it again. First of all, whenever there's an obligation or prohibition that includes the stranger in Chumash, the punishment is always karet, cut off from his people, karet miyamo. And if I look at every single time there's a chiv of karet in Chumash, almost every time, not every time, but almost every time, we include the stranger. In other words, whenever there's a chiv of karet, 90% of the time, Chumash goes out of its way to mention the stranger as well. Now, so my claim is, whenever there's an obligation of the stranger, he's Jewish, because the chiyuv is karet mi'amo, and whenever it's obligation to the stranger, it can be a convert or non-convert. It doesn't make a difference. He's a stranger who's living among you. He's less fortunate. You have to take care of him. It can be a Jew or a non-Jew. It can be a convert or a non-convert. Now, then the question is, why? What's the big question? Why is Chumash going out of its way to tell you a convert is chayv karet? Just say once he's Jewish and that's it. So I want to suggest almost the opposite of what people think. We're not being strict on the stranger. We want to be inclusive of the stranger. So it could be, again, I'm not sure if this is right. The main part of the share is this distinction between the two types of mentions of the stranger who has an obligation and the stranger who we're obligated to take care of. Objectively, again, every time there's a chiyuv of karet, we mention the stranger, and he's always chayav karet. What I want to suggest is, Chumash is going out of his way to tell us the stranger is chayav karet, to teach us that we accept strangers. Because our tendency is not to accept strangers. It's like built into human nature almost. Forget the religious side of things. People usually don't accept strangers in their midst. Now, someone might think, someone converts, he's not really Jewish. I don't want to bring examples from even modern day communities. Okay, I unmuted. I made my mistake. What my claim is that I'm suggesting it could be that Chumash wants to teach us to be inclusive of strangers, and by saying you're cut off from your people, what's it telling you? You're part of the people. My point? I might say, you didn't leave Egypt, you're not chayv in chametz. No, you're chayv in chametz, even though you're a stranger. You're chayv in Yom Kippur, even though you weren't in Har Sinai. So, to emphasize to Am Yisrael that conversion works, and once you're converted, that basically the Judaism isn't genetic, it's covenantal. If you accept the covenant, if you accept to be a member of this covenantal community of God, you're accepted. And you can't say, oh, he's not really Jewish because his genes aren't the right, he doesn't have the right genetic background. Again, I'm not sure if that's right, but that's what I'm suggesting. Again, given that the question is, again, why does Chumash go out of its way to mention the ger over and over again on all these prohibitions whenever there's a chiyuv of karet? Now, on the flip side, whenever there's a need to be kind, we'll see where that comes up a lot, then it can be any stranger, whether he's Jewish or not. Now, what I want to do now, I want to spend 5 minutes and show you where I think conversion is. But before we do that, I want to show you where we find most often the stranger who's not Jewish, or the stranger who's not, it's our obligation to the stranger. There are 3 places in Chumash where we find day-to-day life. In other words, if I'm looking for places in Chumash to talk about day-to-day Jewish behavior, like a melange of laws about day-to-day behavior, you know them, I'm sure, Parshat Mishpatim, correct? Right after Har Sinai, Parshat Mishpatim, chapters 21 through 23 in Sefer Shemot. Doshim to you, chapter 19 in Vayikra. We have law after law about day-to-day behavior. And the main speech in Sefer Devarim, primarily from, the speech from chapter 6 to 26, after the 10 Commandments, so basically the speeches from chapter 5 to 26, that's the main law book in Chumash. In those 3 sections, right, you find ger over and over again. It's almost a mega theme in all those 3 sections. And it's always obligation to the stranger, not the obligation of the stranger. Got it? In all the law sections about day-to-day Jewish life, now we mention the stranger, it's always a stranger, either stam a stranger in our gates, or stranger in your midst or in your gates. But it's always obligation to the stranger. I'll give you 2 quick examples. If you know Parshat Mishpatim, remember in Parshat Mishpatim, there's the legal section, the case laws, what's called Nizikin, damages. And then we have the ethical section, the second half. It starts in the middle of chapter 22. If you take a look at that section, I'll go back to my source sheet again. That's going to be source, we're going to skip Roman numeral 5 and go to 6. Here, number 7, I'm sorry. And number 7, Roman numeral 7. The whole ethical section in Parshat Mishpatim begins with chapter 22, verse 20. Don't wrong a stranger and don't oppress him, because you were strangers in Egypt. And it ends with don't oppress a stranger. Those 2 laws are the bookends of a whole ethical section of laws in Parshat Mishpatim, from the middle of chapter 22 to the middle of chapter 23. But it's the framework of a whole set of laws, of absolute laws in that section between man and his fellow man. But it means it's something fundamental to this law section that follows the 10 Commandments. Now, is a ger mentioned in the 10 Commandments? I should have asked you that before in the beginning. Is there a stranger in the 10 Commandments or not? You might have mentioned it yesterday when you prayed on Shabbos. Is Shabbos in the 10 Commandments? Who has to keep Shabbos? Is a ger mentioned or not?
Yes. In Lo Ta'aseh Kol Melacha.
Yeah. Is he Jewish or not Jewish? Remember, what's it say? Right? Jewish or not Jewish? You never thought about it, did you? Don't worry, it's a machloket rishonim. Actually, Ramban argues with Chazal. Is he Jewish? Now, is he a non-Jew and he can't do your work? He can work if he's not. Chazal say a non-Jew can't keep Shabbat. Correct? Chayiv mita even. So if he's Jewish, why mention him? Of course he has to keep Shabbat. If he's not Jewish, he doesn't have to keep Shabbat. So then most Parshanim say he can't do your work. Got it? He can't. Your ger. It's basically you can't have a Shabbos goy. Don't ask your local rabbi what you're allowed to do. But the way Chazal understand that pasuk is that it's talking about a non-Jew who can't do work for you, but he can do his own work. Or it could be later on in Mishpatim. Remember, Leman Yanuach ben Amatecha B'Ager. We have to rest, so our workers can have a day of rest. It's talking about a non-Jew, a non-Jew who works for you, but they also deserve a day of rest. The question is the ger mentioned that he can't do work for you, but he can do his own work? Or it's our obligation to make sure that he has a day of rest when we have a day of rest. Okay, but that's an argument. Look in the Parshanim, share by itself. Now, let's get back to in Sefer Vayikra. Remember, where do we have a ger there? Everyone knows the famous line of Vafta l'recha kamocha. Let's go back to our main source sheet. We're in that was number 7. Let's go number 8. In Sefer Vayikra, what do we have? Remember, when you're harvesting your field, you have to leave over leket, shicha, and peah. Who do we leave them for? Lani v'lager tazovotam. Who are they? The ger, stranger. Is he Jewish or not Jewish? Good question, right? Then it says at the end, don't mistreat a stranger. First it says, that's in the middle of Parshat Kedoshim to you. At the end it says, now you have to love your neighbor like yourself, even a stranger. In other words, the Klal Gadol of Rabbi Akiva isn't just you have to love your stranger. That's the setup for the grand finale that tells you even a stranger in your midst, you have to love him like your neighbor. Why? Just for the fun of it, where's the Ilana? Art scroll on that one. All the different English translators. Take a look. It's chapter 19 in Vayikra, verse 34. Remember, this is our obligation to the stranger. Not his obligation, but this obligation to the stranger. Because when we have the reasoning, Kiger Meitem Be'eretz Mitzrayim, what's this one say? In Pshat, he can't be a convert. He's got to be a non-Jew because Kiger Meitem Be'eretz Mitzrayim. You have it, Ilana?
Yeah. So it says in the beginning of Pasuk, the proselyte, but then so you were aliens in the land of Egypt.
It's again, he's a proselyte because we were aliens. And the same word, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And how about
So I have
JPS?
this stranger who was
Stranger in both, right?
one of your
JPS is
citizens.
consistent. And
Yeah.
how did Baggerman take care of that? Where's my Mackerman? You checked it?
Stranger.
Stranger in
Right.
both?
Yeah.
But both are strangers, right? That makes sense. But he doesn't use migrant there. That's good. Already. Now, in Devarim, if you can't miss the theme of stranger in Devarim. We had before V'aftem et hager, we had that before, but we had it in I just lost my source sheet. 1 second. Let me get my screen back. In Devarim, you have it in the 10 Commandments, and you have it. Remember Simchat Yom Tov? Who has to be happy? Remember when you have to make other people happy on Yom Tov, include the stranger, is that including a non-Jewish stranger, only a convert? You can already guess how everyone's going to translate it in the different translations. But again, that's our obligation to the stranger. Now I want to spend 5 minutes now, and if there's such a thing as, if there's a convert who is Jewish, I need a definition. Got it? So again, let's go back to my chiluk, my distinction. My claim was that if he's obligated, he's Jewish. If he's not obligated, he can be a Jew or a non-Jew. It doesn't make a difference. In Sefer Shmot, after laws of Pesach, we have a strange law that concludes the story of the Exodus. Remember? It's at the end of chapter 12. There's a very strict law when it comes to Passover. If you don't have circumcision, you can't eat korban Pesach. Remember, any non-Jew can't eat it. It makes sense. It's our freedom. It's our Thanksgiving. We become a nation. It's only for Jewish people. Now, look in Pasuk Memchet. Make it bigger, and we'll read it together. We need all the translations now. Should there be a stranger among you who's not Jewish? Got it? Pesach Hashem, and he wants to do a Pesach. Not he does it, he wants to. No, if there's a stranger who wants to bring Korban Pesach, what? Himolo kol zachar, he has to do circumcision, he and who's in his household. Then he can come and bring Pesach. That means he hasn't done it yet. Basically, if you want to bring Korban Pesach, you have to convert. Listen carefully. Ezrach haaretz. Then he has the same status as an Ezrach. But anyone who's not circumcised can't eat it. Now listen carefully. Torah chad yel Ezrach v'lager gar b'tochechem. What did we just define? Who's the ger gar b'tochechem? In other words, should there be, even what's what Chazal say here? This is according to Chazal, this is conversion. Right? Should there be a stranger in your midst, a ger toshav? If he wants to eat Pesach, he has to be Jewish. We said that in the beginning. Therefore, how does he become Jewish? He wants to do a Pesach, he has to convert. What's conversion? Circumcision. It's like Avraham Avinu, the same phrase as Avraham Avinu. Right? And then once he converts, he has the same status as an Ezrach. Right? And then what are we told afterwards? Once he converts, the same laws apply to him, to the Ezrach and the Ger Hagar, b'tocham. Listen to the phrase, Hager Hagar b'tochachem. We'll go back and check him now. Whenever there's a obligation of the stranger, especially when he has karet, it's always this phrase, Hager Hagar b'tochachem. The stranger living in your midst, among you. I mean, within you. Got it? Meaning, b'tochachem, that's he's Jewish. Now, what's the difference between an Ezrach and a Ger? Listen carefully. What I want to claim is an Ezrach is any member of the 12 tribes. Any member of the 12 tribes owns land, correct? Once Yeshua conquers the land, they own land. A Ger who converts, a male Ger who converts, how females do conversion, it's a different story, read Megillat Ruth. But when a male converts, he can never become a member of a tribe, correct? Because tribal affiliation goes by the father. And therefore, you can convert, but you can't become a member of a tribe. Therefore, you have no land rights on Yovel. Because Yovel goes by the original division of the land when Yeshua conquered the land, by the tribes. Therefore, an Ezrach is someone who has financial security because he owns land. And a Ger, he can be Jewish, but he has no financial security because he doesn't have Yovel rights. Therefore, whenever there's laws relating to land and need, he's always less fortunate and we have to take care of him. That's the Ger Hagar b'tochachem. We'll see examples of it in a minute. Now, what I'm getting at is a Ger can never become an Ezrach because he doesn't own land. But we treat him like he's an Ezrach. And that's what Chumash is teaching you here. Once you convert, he's like an Ezrach. He has all the obligations and the privileges of an Ezrach, except Yovel rights. And therefore, an Ezrach owns land, a Ger doesn't own land. And therefore, the same law applies to Ger ke Ezrach. That'll come up over and over again. Chametz, remember, what's ke Ger ke Ezrach? B'adat Yisrael. Adat Yisrael includes Gerim and Ezrachim. But a Ger Hagar b'tochachem has to be the Jewish one. Go back to Yom Kippur, remember, V'nisach l'chol adat b'nei Yisrael v'Ger Hagar b'tocham. Got it? Every example we brought, if you go back and check them, it's always going to say Ger Hagar b'tochachem or b'tocham. Let's just give a couple more. We'll go back where we were before. Let's look at here. See that? You don't have that a Ger Hagar b'tocham in Devarim, in the last section. It's always a Ger shebisharecha or Ger shebikirbecha. Ger sheb'tochachem, that's the Jewish one. We'll go back to the other ones we saw. We had, where else do we have it? We had it in, there. We had it in Vayikra. No, we lost it. Should have gone forward by mistake. We had Vayikra, didn't we? In on Yom Kippur, where we started. I'll get it back up. Vayikra 19. Where are we? Vayikra 16. I'm sorry, 1629. Let's see if it's still there. 1629. What's it say? If you have time, you can check it out on your own. Okay? Whenever there's the obligation, when you chayav karet, etc., it's always a ger hagar b'tochachem. And my claim is the laws of Pesach are defining first conversion, and therefore, once someone converts, he's a ger hagar b'tochachem, and he's chayav like everyone else. Chumash goes out of his way to mention him. He's chayav karet to make sure that we're inclusive and don't not accept him, even though he's not Jewish, even though he's not genetically Jewish, but once he converted, he has the same obligations and the same rights as every other Jew who was born Jewish. Now, I want to prove this from something in Yecheskel. I realized this later, it's not on the source sheet. Remember I told you a ger doesn't have land rights because he wasn't in the first Chalukah. Once we go to exile, remember, the kibush is gone, there's no more land rights. Yecheskel talks about returning in Yecheskel, the end of chapter 47. So open up Yecheskel, Leviticus here. Open up Yecheskel. If you have a Chumash, open up Yecheskel too. Sorry. Oh, here we go. Yecheskel chapter 47. Yecheskel, where is he? Here we go. Ezekiel 47, all the way at the end. Remember, Yecheskel divides up the land. He talks about the Nachalah being started over again. At the end of chapter 47, this is what happens. He talks about the borders of Israel. Here. In verse 21, I'll make it bigger. V'chilaktem et ha'aretz hazot lechem l'shiftei Yisrael. Got it? You divide up the land to the tribes of Israel. V'yat tapilu otam b'nachalah lechem v'lagerim hagarim b'tochechem. According to Yecheskel, there's going to be 13 divisions of the land for the 12 tribes and another one for the Gerim. The Gerim have an Nachalah now when we come back, because we're going to fix the problem that was caused after the first division of the land, because when we divided the land to the 12 tribes, there's no Gerim yet, except, by the way, for Chovav, who actually has an Nachalah, because he converted before we conquered the land. Now, the Gerim Hagarim B'tochechem means those are the converts. When they come back, they get a Nachalah. But again, v'yatapilu otam b'nachalah lechem lagerim hagarim b'tochechem asher olidu banim b'tochechem v'yu lechem ke'ezrak b'bnei Yisrael itchem yiplu b'nachalah b'toch shiftei Yisrael. Got it? So Yecheskel, when they come back in Beit Sheni, or whenever they're going to come back, what's he going to do? He's going to fix the problem of the ger gar b'tochechem, because they're converted, and therefore they get a nachalah now, and they solve the problem of the first division. But that proves the phrase ger gar b'tochechem, and the problem of Ezrach is someone who owns land, and now they're going to get land as well. Now, I want to finish with two more sources. Let's go back to our source sheet and go back to its review. I'm sorry. Here we go. Here we had the Torah discussing conversion. My point was the laws of Pesach are defining conversion for us, and that defines again that when you convert, to do Pesach, you have to do conversion, which is circumcision. And then he has the rights of an Ezrach and the applications of an Ezrach. And then the same law is going to apply to the Ezrach and the Ger Gar B'tochechem. And we now define Ger Gar B'tochechem. Now, there's another law that you had in Parshat Shlach. Listen to this one. This law, at first glance, doesn't make any sense. We had in chapter 15, and let me actually open up a Chumash and show you inside. We had the story of the spies. The story of the spies is over, and we have a law about giving what's called nesachim when you come to the land of Israel. When you bring a sacrifice, you bring an animal, and with the animal, you have what's called nesachim. You bring flour and wine. You have a cookout, you need bread, and you have drinks. So the same thing applies when you have a korban. In the desert, there's no agriculture in the desert. There's only breeding manna. And therefore, there's no obligation to bring nesachim, to bring flour and wine in the desert. And therefore, what's Chumash tell us in chapter 15? God tells Moshe, tell Bnei Israel, when you come to the land of Israel, which God's giving you, and you bring if you bring an animal for whatever reason to God, to bring a reach nichoach, the person bringing the korban, you bring flour with your korban, and you bring wine. Got it? How much wine? You know by heart. How much flour? Right, it's right over here. And yain chatzi ahin for a par, shishita in the aisle, revita in the keves yain. We had no doubt from Rosh Chodesh Leini. Got it? Now, who has to bring this? Listen carefully. Okay, Pasuk Yud Gimel. Kol he'ezrach b'yaseh kacha et eleh. Any citizen who owns land has to do this. Why? Because he owns land. Now, when he comes to Israel, he'll own land. And therefore, he has to bring flour and wine because he can. How about a stranger? Listen carefully. Pasuk Yudalad, verse 14. What's wrong with this pasuk? Right? The word "o," the "o" here, the verse doesn't make sense. Say "ki yagur itchem ger." or ger shebetochachem. What's this O in the middle? But we see here there's two types of strangers. Should there be living among you a stranger, not a convert? O asher betochem means ager shebetochachem. In other words, if there's a stranger in your midst, whether he's a convert or not a convert, if ger asher betochem is a convert and stam ger is not a convert, then what's it telling you? Anyone stranger, remember, a non-Jew can bring a korban, can bring an olah, and therefore, if he brings a korban for reich nichoach, he has to treat just like you. In other words, we don't differentiate between who you are when you bring a korban to the Beit HaMikdash, Jew or non-Jew, Ezrach or stranger. You bring flour. What's called sedin in the korban, not a din in the person. Therefore, kahal, the whole congregation, the same law applies to ger and for everyone among you. In other words, we want to be inclusive. You have the same obligation like everyone else. Okay. The same law applies to everybody. But again, we can see from here, there's two types of gerim, agar itchem or asher b'tochachem. That was one last thing. And let me go back to our source sheet. And I want to end with one last point. We have 2 minutes left. Let me share my screen again. Before we share the screen, just one idea. Here we go. When we talk about when you study names of children, if you come to Israel, like the whole new generation, kids have all new kinds of names, unheard of before. It's part of but when you see names of people, names tell you about their parents, not about the children. Everyone agree with me on that? That's great. When you see names, you can see like patterns in names. Like an example, there's a lot of rabbis named Yishmael before the 7th century. All of a sudden, no Jews are named Yishmael once Islam starts. That's not a coincidence, right? Remember, Rabbi Shmuel was a Tana. Okay, I get my 5-minute warning from Magnetti. Okay, so what I'm getting at is that names reflect the parents of the generation. Got it? Now, did Moshe Rabbeinu have any children? Sure, he did. What did Moshe Rabbeinu name his first child? Remember? Gershon. Why?
Yeah,
In other words, if Moshe names his first child Gershon, ki ger haiti be'eretz nochriya, let's go back to the end. That's our last source there. Here. Bateled ben vayikrat shmo Gershon, ki amar ger haiti be'eretz nochriya. Now, what's Eretz Nochriya? Is that Midian or Egypt? Ask your local parshan. But if Moshe names his first son Ger, after called Gershon because he himself was a stranger, means Moshe's entire life he feels like a stranger. He's a stranger in Egypt. He's a stranger in Midian. He's a stranger to his own people because he didn't grow up with them. But it's amazing that our leader who God gave the Torah to, what I'm trying to show you is Ger is such a mega theme in Chumash. And Chumash takes that theme of remembering the Exodus, isn't just saying thank you, but acting thank you. And if I go back to how we began with Brit Ben Abtarim, where God tells us that to become God's people, you have to be strangers to someone else's land, know what it feels like, not just to say thank you when God redeems you, and thank you for saving me, but remembering what it felt like to be a stranger. You see that theme all through Chumash. Remember, therefore, the theme of Ger is a mega theme in Chumash. Now, the distinction I made about why Chumash obligates Dafka convert and he's Chayiv Karet, and why I mention it over and over again, that I think only adds to it. I'm not hinging this year on that conclusion. I'm just adding that it could be Chumash is doing that to emphasize how important it is to be accepting of strangers, of converts. And they're obligated just like everybody else. But you can't miss the mega theme of Chumash, how Chumash, being a stranger and caring for less fortunate people, is part of the DNA of our people. I have 1 minute left, just one last thing. In Breshit, Avram wants to buy a burial plot, remember? And what's he say to the people? Ger v'toshav anochi imachem. Remember that? Now, Ger v'toshav, we have that one other time in Chumash, in the laws of Yovel. Remember, what's God say? Ba'aretz lo timacher letzmitut, they can't be sold right, ki gerim v'toshavim atem imadi. In the end of the Tochacha, at the end of the laws of Yovel, in the end of chapter 25, I know we have to finish the class up, but if you look at the end of chapter 25 in Vayikra, right, even when we're sovereign and we have the land, every 50 years the land goes back to its original ownership, and God wants us to know that even though we're sovereign, we're like Gerim B'Toshavim. Because in front of God, we always have the status that it's not totally ours, it belongs to God. God gives us to it for a reason. And our right to the land is how we act on the land and how we treat the people who are less fortunate. Anyway, so have a good day, everybody. And hopefully next year I'll be able to see you guys in person.